Check out this clip by Jordan Peterson from his Australia tour. This one is really unique, and Philosophy Insights did some special editing, so enjoy.
And we're with Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, cultural phenomenon, and according to Auckland Peace Action, the biggest threat to New Zealand's way of life and civilization that, we've seen since the last earthquake. They came out earlier this week and threw a lot of labels at Dr. Peterson, and their spokesperson Iris, came on with me yesterday simply so I could ask them to, provide the proof of their accusations. I didn't think he did that well, or they did that well, Jordan.
Well, it was quite the remarkable interview. I think that, I don't know how many people have watched it, or listened to it, but I suspect quite a few, and it's no wonder, because it was a feat of journalistic persistence, I would say, on your part. You didn't let your interviewee off the hook for a moment, and there wasn't much content there. There was a lot of exactly the same sort of thing that's been happening for the last 2 years. It's really quite appalling, and that what seems to happen generally in the journalistic sphere on the negative side for me is that there's a list of epithets that are, it's like all the radical leftists have a list of epithets that are sort of at hand. Maybe they have them on a little sticky on their computer. Misogynist, homophobe, Islamophobe, transphobe, bigot, racist. Then there's often some either Nazi.
Don't forget your cocaine addiction either.
Implications or that, or there's Jewish shill, which is another one that comes up now and then. And the idea seems to be that if you don't agree with what someone says, that you just lay out the longest possible list of pejoratives that your imagination, your collective imagination, can generate, and hope that one of them is sufficiently true in some sense because of something you once said, that it sticks and you're done. And it's getting downright dull. I mean,
well, Jordan, I'd say that it seems to me that liberal journalists throughout the Western world have been lining up to try and take you down.
I've had a fair number of journalists who've been supportive of me. Now, whether or not they are on the liberal side, they're certainly not on the radical left side. Yes, this has been happening pretty much nonstop for 2 years. And they're basically out of insults, as far as I can tell, which in some sense disarms them. But they're actually getting rather dull to read because it's always the same old thing. Although the person you interviewed yesterday did have a new twist, which was greatest threat to the civilization of New Zealand, which was really quite impressive as far as pejoratives went.
All right. So we've dealt with Auckland Peace Action. I know you're in Australia now. Has the, if you like, the virulent opposition to you, for whatever reason, is it starting to subside? And I know there haven't been protesters, I understand, so far in Australia.
There was a few in Adelaide, but about 25, and it wasn't exactly clear what they were protesting. They seemed to be more concerned about homosexual rights, which I don't really know what that has to do with me, but it had to do with whatever they were interested in protesting. But there was nothing in Melbourne at all, although there was quite a large police presence at the venue. There were a lot of people there. There's about 5,500 people, but there wasn't a single protester. And I would say that, yes, overall, the virulence and also the frequency of the hit pieces in the media has declined rather precipitously in the last 3 or 4 months. And I think it's because it's become dreadfully repetitious, and because no smoking pistol of any sort has emerged. You know, people have gone over virtually everything I've said to students for the last 20 years, because almost all of it is recorded, and scoured my Twitter feed and my Facebook and, all the social media platforms that are usable, and haven't been able to find anything so far that's of sufficient reprehensibility to take my reputation out.
But the diet's a bit weird, Jordan. Come on, you'll own that.
Well, it's not just a bit weird. It's very weird. But it's not something I
absolutely. Yeah.
Enjoy, let's say.
All right. I want to go back 2 years, and in many ways I look at you, and if I was going to put you in a fable, you're the guy who said the emperor has no clothes, the emperor of wokeness, of political correctness, of third-wave feminism. Did you plan 2 years ago to be where you are now, a global cultural phenomenon? Was it all part of some clever manipulation of, modern social media? Or did you just stand up and say, I'm not going to do this?
Well, I mean, I was writing a book, and I was hoping it would be successful, so there was that. And, I had been experimenting quite substantially with YouTube, putting my lectures from the university on YouTube and some lectures that I had done for a small television show. And they were developing a certain following, so I had about 1 million views far before the political controversy hit. But no, I mean, there's no way of predicting what happened. It's a completely unpredictable phenomenon. But I can say that I said what I felt like saying as carefully as I possibly could, and I'd pretty much had enough of it. I mean, seriously, I've had enough of it. And I'm not happy with the radical leftists. I think the postmodern philosophy is intellectually vapid, nihilistic, malevolent, destructive, arrogant, and narcissistic, impractical as well, all at the same time. I think that what's happening to the humanities and social sciences is borders on fraudulently criminal if it hasn't already passed the line. And I'm absolutely no friend whatsoever of radical leftist utopians. I feel that there's, after 100 years of evidence of complete bloody catastrophe on the side of the radical left, it's time for us to wake up and notice that something has gone wrong on that end of the spectrum. And I don't see any responsibility being taken for that at all. I've called publicly for the moderate leftist types, whom I have some sympathy for, to draw some lines. It's like, all right, we know that things can go too far on the left. When? Exactly. Where is it that you go too far? Now, my sense, it's with the equity doctrine, which I think is not really emotionally powerful, unfortunately. It doesn't have that kick that's necessary to make something really stick in the memory. But I think the idea of equality of outcome is dangerous beyond comprehension.
All right. I want to talk about a few things going on in New Zealand, which is, part of the culture war. We're part of the global community and we're connected online. First up, we have a cabinet. The Labour Party, the largest member of or part of our coalition government, it has a quota, a male-female quota for cabinet posts.
Yeah, Canada too.
Yeah, what do you think of that?
I think there's absolutely no excuse for it. I think that the radical leftists are always yammering on about biological essentialism, which they associate with something akin to fascism, the idea that there are mutable biological characteristics that define people. And yet they're the first people to insist that if you're going to have a cabinet that is, let's say, both competent and representative, that you have to divide it according to identity categories, and first and foremost, perhaps, the ones of sex. And to pick your cabinet by genitalia is not an acceptable technical move. And exactly the same thing happened in Canada, where 25% of our major parties' elected officials were female, but 50% of the cabinet members ended up being female. And all that means, what that certainly means, is that the most qualified people were not selected, because it's statistically impossible for them to have been selected. It was cheap virtue signaling. And it's also technically impossible, even from the perspective of the leftists themselves with their intersectionality, because they insist that people have to be judged in relationship to their oppression on multiple dimensions simultaneously. And I've done some back-of-the-envelope mathematical calculations, and if you have 10 dimensions that mark you out, let's say, as in terms of the group affiliations that characterize you, then you're the only person like that in the world. So as you multiply, all you have to do is do the math. As you multiply the number of groups that have to be given favored status because of their hypothetically oppressed situation, then you make it increasingly impossible for equality of outcome to even be to be something that can be practically implemented without a bureaucracy of terrifying proportions.
We also have a Ministry of Women's Affairs in New Zealand, and the Minister of Women's Affairs, or the Minister for Women as she's known, suggested recently that there were too many white old men on boards in New Zealand of private and public companies, and just suggested that they needed to move aside so there could be more diversity. Your response to that suggestion?
Well, what's her racial and ethnic background, just out of curiosity?
I think she's born in America, Julianne Genter. She's a member of our Green Party here.
Is she white?
Yes.
Well, maybe it's time for her to bloody well move aside and let someone who isn't white have her position.
All right. So I'm taking it you don't agree with Julianne Genter.
Well, there's also, look, they've tried this in Scandinavia where they've put, they've put quotas for females on boards. And part of the idea was that if you did that, that you would increase the rate at which women would move through managerial and administrative status rankings. And that has had zero success.
Their suggestion also is, Jordan, that actually women can somehow up the financial performance of companies.
Yeah. Sure.
So you don't believe those stats, that research?
Well, there's no evidence for that. What elevates the financial productivity of companies is quite clear. Trait conscientiousness, which is a marker for integrity and trustworthiness and diligence and dutifulness, is a very good predictor of long-term economic productivity, and so is general cognitive ability. And that holds across sexes and races. And the reason for that, and this is the non-racist and non-sexist way of looking at the world, by the way, is that there is far more difference between individuals within groups than there are between groups. Because look, the fundamental racist, sexist, ethnocentric proposition is that there are more differences between groups of people than there are within groups of people.
Yeah.
That's essentially the racist doctrine.
Yeah.
And so we need some black people because, all those black people are the same. And unless we have a voice or two from a black person, then we don't have that set of identity issues represented. Well, it's just simply not the case, because most of the diversity comes at the level of individual personality and temperament. And the literature on that is crystal clear. These are pseudo-intellectual claims made by people on the radical left, and they're very dangerous